very good evening. You're watching Prime Time News here on TV1, coming to you live and direct from the Newsfirst studios here in Colombo. For the Newsfirst team, I am Raz Irfan, and before we move on with our bulletin, here's a look at your headlines for this evening.
Vasantha Mudalige released after 167 days. Kalaniya University students take to the streets. Police use water cannons to disperse protesters. Repeal the PTA immediately. Countries, including the United States and Britain, stress at the United Nations Universal Periodic Review. Rehearsals held for the 75th Independence Day. Catholic Church to boycott celebrations. Protests against new tax regime. President given 2 weeks to call for a discussion. Hold elections in March, giving people across the country a voice in their future, says US Undersecretary of State Victoria Nuland. A government with a public mandate is required to unlock IMF funds similar to Bangladesh, says Dr. Harsha De Silva.
Now on to your top story this evening. The convener of the Inter-University Students' Federation, Vasantha Mudalige, was released on bail on Wednesday after spending 167 days in detention and remand custody.
On Tuesday, the convener of the Inter-University Students' Federation, Vasantha Mudalige, was released from charges filed under the Prevention of Terrorism Act, and based on that, Council made a request for bail for 3 occasions filed against him. Upon considering the facts, the 4th Magistrates Court ordered to release Mudalige on bail.
Court did
not grant bail earlier for those 3 charges because he was arrested under the PTA. We informed the court that he was released from all those charges. In addition, we highlighted the fact that he was remanded for a prolonged period. Accordingly, the court granted bail for all 3 cases.
Vasantha Mudalige was thereafter granted bail and escorted to the court and was allowed to exit the premises after fulfilling the bail conditions.
මෙරටේ වෘත්තීය සමිති සිවිල් සංවිධාන බහුජන සංවිධාන සියල්ල එකතු වෙලා කරපු අරගලයක් ඇතුලේ මහජන බලය ඉස්සරහා.
This nefarious government was forced to bow down to the people's power following the struggle carried out by all segments of the country. Gotabaya Rajapaksa was forced to leave. After Gotabaya Rajapaksa, Mahinda Rajapaksa and Basil Rajapaksa were forced to leave. Another man was seated as the executive and made various statements. We were arrested as a result of that. They wanted to suppress the IUSF and the people of this country. However, the people have managed to defeat it. The government was forced to kneel in the face of the student movement led by the IUSF. The thousands of attorneys, civil activists, as well as every single person who shared a post against the government. We have to say this to the government. Not a single issue has been solved. The government will not get Aladdin's magic lamp as a result of the upcoming elections to solve the issues. The advanced level students do not have electricity to complete their studies. The people are finding it difficult to afford 3 meals. While in prison, I met thousands of other prisoners. I shared my experience with them and they did the same. I met hundreds of prison officers. The salary issue in the public sector has not been solved. However, the government is taxing the people to a great extent. We are not ready to bow down to this government. This is a new chapter of the Aragalaya. We will show you what the power of the people is.
තවත් ආරම්භයක්. ඒ නිසා මහජන බලය කියන්නේ මොකද්ද කියන එක අපි ඉස්සරහට පෙන්නන්නම්.
The Inter-University Students Federation protested opposite the University of Kelaniya, demanding the immediate release of its student leader and several other student activists who remained in custody. University students attempted to head to Kiribati from the university premises along the Colombo Kandy main road. However, Sri Lanka police prevented the march, citing a court order. The university students attempted to proceed and the police took measures to disperse the crowd. Thereafter, the students proceeded to the Kelaniya University premises to protest.
The government introduced suppression instead of solutions. We would urge them to repeal the PTA, Bureau of Rehabilitation Act and the ragging laws that would suppress the student leaders.
The international community has called for Sri Lanka to repeal the controversial Prevention of Terrorism Act, and India has again called for the full implementation of the 13th Amendment to the Constitution. These comments were made when Sri Lanka's national report under the 4th cycle of the Universal Periodic Review was taken up at the UNHRC. The Universal Periodic Review is a unique process which involves a review of the human rights records of all UN member states.
The 4th cycle of the UPR commenced in November of 2022 and Sri Lanka's 4th UPR commenced today during the 42nd session of the UPR Working Group in Geneva. Sri Lanka's delegation to the review will be led by Minister of Foreign Affairs Ali Sabri by means of a pre-recorded video statement.
On economic stabilization, the government is keenly aware and sensitive to the hardships encountered by the people due to certain recent reform. However, these are necessary structural reforms that have long been overdue, essential to make economy sustainable in the long run. The government is addressing the underlying issues on a priority basis, including by implementing strict financial control and oversight measures. While the immediate priority is economic recovery, the government's commitment to the UPR process depicts our dedication towards the advancement of the human rights.
We emphasise the importance of reconciliation, justice and accountability for all communities, independent domestic institutions, the preservation of civil society space and the repeal of the Prevention of Terrorism Act. We recommend that Sri Lanka allow all its communities freely to commemorate and memorialise victims of the civil war.
However, we are concerned by reports of abuses by members of the security forces, the use of anti-terror legislation to detain human rights defenders, and the rise in corruption. We recommend that Sri Lanka, 1, replace the Prevention of Terrorism Act, cease arbitrary detentions for freedom of expression, and ensure legislation is aligned with international human rights standards. End impunity for human rights violations, abuses, and harassment, especially against members of ethnic and religious minority communities, by holding those responsible to account, including security forces and government officials, and implementing HRC resolution commitments.
China has said it has 3 recommendations to Sri Lanka.
First, continue to promote economic and social development, raise people's living standards, and strengthen social security system. Second, continue to create favorable conditions for women to participate equally in political, economic and public life. Thirdly, continue to engage constructively with all parties concerned in order to achieve national reconciliation.
India recommends the following. Continue with policy measures to strengthen Sri Lankan economy and combating poverty and its impact on the vulnerable segments, including the Indian origin Tamils. Continue to take measures to ensure that fundamental freedoms and human rights of all its citizens, in particular all Tamil-speaking citizens, are fully protected. India believes that full implementation of 13th Amendment and early conduct of provincial elections are...
An additional Solicitor General from the Attorney General's Department responded to claims on the recent protests and arrests.
While the rights of citizens to peaceful protest is recognized, all steps taken by the authorities have been within a democratic and constitutional framework respecting civil and political rights. Any arrest made by the authorities in instances where protests exceeded the peaceful realm has been so taken in the interest of national security and preservation of public order, in accordance with the laws of the country and subject to judicial oversight. It is reiterated that any protest must be carried out within the framework of the law while ensuring that no criminal or unlawful activity is committed in the process of or in the guise of such protests.
The UPR working group was also apprised on the Prevention of Terrorism Act.
It is noteworthy that these salutary amendments to the PTA took place after 43 years. It is a progressive step in advancing, securing and protecting the rights of persons. The recent amendments to the Act have provided for investigations under the PTA to be subject to enhanced judicial oversight and monitoring of places of detention by the Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka. Further, the amendments uphold the right of the detainees to legal representation and the right to communication with their relatives. The amendments already adopted are an interim measure towards the promulgation of a more comprehensive anti-terror legislation.
Rehearsals for the 75th Independence Day Parade on the 4th of February were held today at Golface in Colombo. Foreign dignitaries from 16 nations have confirmed their attendance for the Independence Day celebrations this year. According to the Ministry of Home Affairs, over 3,100 guests have been invited for this year's Independence Day celebrations. A cost of 200 million rupees will be incurred for the event. Golface Aragale activists convened a joint media briefing in Colombo today to announce that a 24-hour satyagraha will be launched on the 3rd of February.
We want to know if police officers and security personnel receive their salaries. What sort of freedom does the young generation in this country have? Most of our peers are leaving this country. This is not the freedom people want. Frankly, they do not have freedom. We will converge at Maradana on the 3rd of February at 3 p.m. and will launch a 24-hour satyagraha until 3 p.m. on the 4th of February in a peaceful manner.
The government says they won't be able to face the international community if they do not celebrate the 75th Independence Day. Aren't they ashamed to be representatives of a bankrupt nation that is burdened by a severe debt crisis? What is the point of celebrating independence, wasting millions of rupees when the country does not even have funds to carry out their day-to-day activities?
A
24-hour satyagraha has been launched in Colombo from 3 p.m. on the 3rd to 3 p.m. on the 4th for the people to celebrate a meaningful Independence Day without pointless embellishments.
A group of monks led by Venerable Dr. Omalpe Sobidhathera visited the office of the Prime Minister and handed over a letter on the Independence Day celebration.
This is an exhibition of firearms which are not even manufactured here in Sri Lanka. Do we even have the freedom to celebrate? Can we even sing our national anthem with pride?
සවපවත්තන්න තරම් නිදහසක් අපට ඇත්ත වශයෙන්ම නැහැ. සුන්දර සිරිබරිනි සුරැඳි ඇති සෝභමාන ලංකා කියලා කියන්න පුළුවන්ද? කොහෙද සුන්දරත්වය? කෝ සෞභාග්‍ය? කෝ ශාස්ත්‍රීය භාවය? ඒ සියල්ලම නැති වෙලා තියෙන්නේ.
ජනාධිපතිතුමා කියන්නේ ජාත්‍යන්තරව පෙන්වන්න මේක අනිවාර්යයෙන්ම සමරන්න ඕනේ කියලා.
I think he wants to play theatrics in front of the international community. Is it the right thing to borrow someone else's clothes and show off when you don't even have your own? What pride do we have in wearing someone else's clothes to show off?
අපි අනුන්ගෙන් වස්ත්‍රයක් ඉල්ලාගෙන අඳින එකද වගකීම සහ නම්බුව.
The Catholic Church says it opposes celebrating the 75th Independence Day in a ceremonial manner.
From malnutrition, many people are being laid off, small medium-scale businesses are crashing, the rule of law has deteriorated severely, human rights are being violated without any remorse, laws including the PTA are being misused to suppress fundamental rights of the people, electricity cannot be provided continuously even during the AL exam period, and the lives of patients are at risk due to medical shortage. It is a great waste and a crime to stage such celebration during a time in which the country is bankrupt. We vehemently oppose a celebration which the President considers should be done with much pomp and pageantry. On the cusp of the 75th anniversary of independence, what should have been done was for all political parties that ruined the country's economy for 75 years, accepting their flaws and apologizing to the people. Everyone who squandered and stole the country's resources should have been brought before the law, regardless of social status, and those funds should have been recovered. Corrupt businessmen who have evaded taxes should have been identified and taxed. Even if such actions were taken, we could have found solace in the fact that after 75 years, we have taken the first step in creating a safe nation for all to live freely. Our stance is, we oppose Independence Day being celebrated grandly. No one representing the Catholic Church will attend it.
The Organization of Medical Professionals for Systemic Change says it is humorous that an exorbitant amount is being spent to hold Independence Day celebrations with pride at a time when all sectors of the country have collapsed. In the statement, the Organization of Medical Professionals for Systemic Change said common sense is sufficient to decide whether it is appropriate to celebrate Independence Day by spending exorbitant amounts at a time when there are people who are suffering without food and medicine. The Organization of Medical Professionals for Systemic Change is represented by a plethora of university teachers and specialist doctors.
While several factions raised concerns on the government's attempt to spend 200 million for the Independence Day celebration, university lecturers in the country took to the streets against the new tax policy. A protest was held opposite the Open University in Nawala on Wednesday against the new tax policy, and leaflets were also distributed to the public to raise awareness on the issue.
The main reason we are against this tax policy is because this tax policy doesn't tax the affluent groups in the society. This tax policy was set out by politicians to tax the middle income earners in the country. We need a tax policy which is free from corruption. We have never seen the politicians paying taxes based on their assets. Politicians who entered politics with empty hands are now owners of TV stations, and they even own rugby teams in the country.
Lecturers of the Kalaniya University held a demonstration near the entrance of the university today. Another protest took place opposite the Ruhuna University.
The tax policy will be the cause for the collapse of our country's economy. Even if the government has a target here to collect these taxes from the state sector workers, you will never be able to remedy the damages caused to the economy. This will hamper the revenue streams of the government, and we will fall back to the same situation. Therefore, we urge the government to implement a tax policy which the people can cope with.
Sabaragamu University Teachers Union protested against the government's arbitrary tax policy today by marching to the Pambahinna Junction. Lecturers of the Faculty of Agriculture of the Northwestern University also protested in Makandura today. In addition, the teachers at the Rajarata University also protested against the new tax policy.
Lecturers of the Rajarata University called on the chief incumbent of the Mihintale Rajamahaviharaya, Venerable Walava Hengunawave Dhammaratana Thero.
These rulers are choking and sucking the blood of the innocent people of this country through this new tax policy. You are the ones who gave them the power, and today people are all trying to commit suicide because of hunger. The same group of politicians have been governing this country for some time now. When you were in power, you accused the people of looting public funds. It is the same when you are in the opposition now. All parliamentarians should tap into their conscience. We can save these innocent people if we recover the looted money from these thieves and direct those towards the treasury.
The Federation of University Teachers Associations, the Government Medical Officers Association, the CEB Engineers Union, the Ceylon Bank Employees Union, the Specialist Doctors Union, among 30 professional bodies, addressed a letter to the President seeking an audience to discuss the tax issue. The Professionals Trade Union Collective have informed the President that they hope to meet for talks this week. We have
informed the President and the Finance Minister, but no response was received. We, as the university teachers, are not saying to remove the taxes. There is no issue in paying taxes. The tax policy should be prepared in a manner that does not inconvenience the professionals. We will give them 1 week's time. We will issue a warning to the government next week and venture into severe action. We will awaken the sleeping giant and force them to kneel.
Trade unions attached to ports, petroleum, power and water sectors are preparing to launch a joint protest on the 8th of February, urging the government to immediately amend the unjust tax regime. The decision was announced at a media briefing in Colombo today.
The 4 institutions that unify today will step onto the streets on the 8th. We want the government to know that if it pressurizes us into launching a continuous trade union action, ports, power, petroleum and water supply trade unions will launch a joint action. We clearly want Ranil Rajapaksa's government to know that they should not push us to that extent.
Forty trade unions from the port are in this alliance. On the 8th of February, we will carry out a go-slow protest at the port. The government must immediately withdraw this tax amendment. If not, operations at the port will stop. Petroleum trade unions will band together and come to Colombo. In Colombo, we will make a statement. That is, do not toy with the salaries of working masses. Are you trying to push us away from our trade? Or are you trying to force us out of this country? We have pledged never to leave the country, and that is why we are banding together to safeguard our institutions.
Minister of Health Keheliya Rambukwalla sought permission from the Colombo High Court today to travel overseas to purchase medicine required for the country. An overseas travel ban had been imposed on the minister over a case filed against purchasing GI pipes unnecessarily, utilizing funds of the Sri Lanka Rupavahini Corporation in the run-up to the 2015 presidential election. Counsel appearing on behalf of the minister said if his client is not allowed to travel overseas, it would severely hinder the process of procuring medicine required for the country. Accordingly, High Court Judge Navaratna Marasinghe granted permission for Minister Keheliya Rambukwalla to travel overseas from the 21st of February to the 20th of May 2023. Meanwhile, Attorney Namal Rajapaksa strongly objected to Minister Keheliya Rambukwalla entering the High Court premises in his official vehicle and parking it within the premises prior to appearing in court.
Ministers have entered our car park by force. Now see, lawyers are facing difficulties in carrying out their court work. Can we even enter their car parks? We are hoping to launch a complaint in this regard. When the security stopped them, they have entered the premises by force. They are public servants who are getting paid by the public. After trespassing by force and causing a jam here, they are using another vehicle to go. All these are public funds.
The minister could not use his official vehicle to leave the court premises as it was blocked by the vehicles used by attorneys. He then used another vehicle from his convoy and left the court premises.
More news will come our way after this short commercial break. Stay tuned with us.
News First. Main sponsor.
Durden's Hospital, dedicated to you. Experience the best in healthcare at Durden's Hospital's new Alfred Place wing. We continue to evolve into a purpose-built hospital of the future, with an ambience built to deliver world-class care. Durden's Hospital, dedicated to you.
Welcome back to the news. US Under-Secretary of State for Political Affairs Victoria Nuland says it is important for Sri Lanka to go ahead with the March elections. She spoke to reporters in Colombo on the IMF program for Sri Lanka.
You mark the 75th anniversary of Sri Lankan independence. I don't have to tell you that this is obviously a critical moment for your country as the government works with the IMF and international creditors to stabilize the economy and to put Sri Lanka back on a path to stability, recovery, and growth. It's also a vital time for Sri Lanka to strengthen its democracy, its governance, and reconciliation. This includes proceeding with local elections this March, giving people across the country a voice in their future, starting of the national dialogue on reconciliation, which needs to show results for all Sri Lankans, and proceeding with reform of the PTA so that it meets international standards. Today, we had a chance to meet with President Wickremesinghe to talk about U.S. ongoing support for Sri Lanka at this complex time, and particularly our support for quick conclusion of your negotiations with the IMF. Sri Lanka's major creditors have been working with the IMF. As the largest bilateral creditor of Sri Lanka, we expect that China will provide credible and specific assurances regarding its readiness to join the rest of us in meeting IMF standards regarding debt restructuring. So we are increasingly seeing all the rest of Sri Lanka's creditors come forward with those assurances, and now all eyes are on China to do the same.
China says that they will give a 2-year moratorium, and India too has given an assurance, and we saw that the IMF has already released their disbursement for Bangladesh, but Sri Lanka is still waiting to overcome this crisis. What is your stance on this?
We want to see an IMF agreement as quickly as possible. That's what Sri Lanka deserves. That's what Sri Lanka needs. We, the United States, are prepared to do our part. Our Paris Club partners are prepared to do their part. India has made strong commitments that it will provide the credible assurances that the IMF is looking for. What China has offered so far is not enough. As I said before, we need to see credible and specific assurances that they will meet the IMF standard of debt relief.
Opposition leader Sajith Premadasa, speaking in Ampara on Tuesday, emphasised that dealings with the IMF must be done with the people in mind and not for the benefit of the rulers.
We need to deal with the IMF and obtain their support. However, it needs to be done with the people in mind and not from the ruler's perspective. The electricity tariff is to be increased twice. They are trying to tax everyone with an income of 45,000 rupees. When we ask why, the government says the IMF said so. This government has no mandate. The president has no mandate. The agreements reached with these rogues are not valid. Our government will speak with the IMF and will proceed to provide relief to the people. We will achieve a people-friendly IMF agreement. We are not ready to bow down to them and auction this country for pennies.
National People's Power leader Anrukumara Dissanayake attended a public rally in Samanturai on Tuesday.
Regardless of what trick Ranil Wickremesinghe has up his sleeve, the election will take place on the 9th of March. Do you recall Ranil Wickremesinghe warning us not to step out onto the streets and said he would deploy forces? He called himself Hitler. Now he is saying no to the election. He is not allowing the people to express their opposition on the streets and at the polls. No matter who bows down to those undemocratic orders, the compass will not. Are you satisfied with the current process? Do you want change? The people voted to send the central bank thief Ranil Wickremesinghe home. However, the government that was elected made him president. Why are they delaying the election? Sri Lanka is experiencing renewed change. The power that changed sides over time is now moving towards a new direction. They are afraid of that.
MPs Dr. Harsha De Silva, Iran Vikramaratne and Buddhika Patrana attended the media briefing convened by the Samiki Janabala Vege.
The government said the revenue for January was some 178 billion rupees. However, the recurrent expenditure was 149 billion rupees, with an interest payment of 226 billion rupees, capital expenditure of 150 billion rupees, and an expenditure of 37 billion rupees. They say there's a deficit of 377 billion rupees. The people of this country say, yes, we need to celebrate the 75th Independence Day. However, does it have to cost 200 million rupees? We need to think afresh based on the data that was presented yesterday. If the revenue is at a low, what needs to be done to boost revenue? Everyone only speaks of the tax. There's an issue on how justifiable that can be. The Committee on Public Finance told the Inland Revenue Department to produce a tax report during the first week of February. We want to know if the President, Prime Minister, Ministers, MPs, senior officials and others were taxed on their cash and non-cash benefits just like the private sector. However, the committee now ceases to exist and we have no way of questioning them.
Views were also expressed on an immediate disbursement from the IMF to Bangladesh and the delay for Sri Lanka.
They achieved the staff level agreement a few days ago and the loan was approved soon after. They released some $400 million to Bangladesh. There are two differences. One is the timing with the IMF. We've been telling them since 2020, but they never listen to us. Second, the Bangladesh government has a mandate. There's an issue on Sri Lanka's agreement.
MP Gajendra Kumar Ponnambalam says that a genuine system change is necessary.
If people genuinely wish to have change and not repeat the 75 years of utter failure of the past, I think it's time that we realize that substantial change have to take place. I mean, when you use terms like system change, those terms cannot be hollow and it cannot just simply mean personality changes and hoping that something good will come out of it. A system change means that there has to be radical change if Sri Lanka is to avoid the 75-year failure that happened in the past.
Commonwealth Secretary General Patricia Scotland arrived in Sri Lanka on an official visit on Wednesday evening. Commonwealth Secretary General Patricia Scotland is to attend the 75th National Independence Day celebration of Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka has been ranked 101st place in the Corruption Perception Index for 2022. The Corruption Perception Index is a report compiled by Transparency International.
The CPI scores 180 countries and territories around the world based on perceptions of public sector corruption. The scores reflect the views of experts and surveys from the business sector. The CPI is calculated using data from 13 external sources, including the World Bank, World Economic Forum, private risk and consulting companies, and think tanks. The CPI uses a scale from 0 to 100, whereby 100 is considered very clean and 0 is considered highly corrupt. Sri Lanka's score in the 2022 CPI stands at 36 out of 100, 1 point lower than the previous year, which was 37, and 2 points lower than from 2020 to 2017 and 2014, where the CPI score remains stagnated at 38. Sri Lanka ranks at 101 in 2022, along with Panama, Albania, Kazakhstan, Serbia, Ecuador, Peru and Thailand. Over the past 10 years, Sri Lanka's CPI score has remained relatively the same, from the highest being 40 in 2012 and the lowest being 36, which is the score this year and was the score in 2016. The top countries on the index are Denmark, Finland and New Zealand, while South Sudan, Syria and Somalia remain at the bottom of the CPI in 2022. Types of public sector corruption and related criteria captured in the CPI encompass bribery, diversion of public funds, effective prosecution of corruption cases, adequate legal frameworks, access to information and legal protections for whistleblowers, journalists and investigators. The report is released ahead of Sri Lanka's 4th Universal Periodic Review, which will take place on the 1st of February 2023 in Geneva, Switzerland.
Silicon Valley investor Tim Draper says that Sri Lanka must repaint itself with confidence. He was speaking at the startup launch in Colombo on Tuesday. Sri Lanka, from troubled nation to startup nation, a program to boost the island nation's image took place in Colombo. The special event featured Silicon Valley investor Tim Draper, who had some important advice for Sri Lanka.
You've been painted into a corner by the press. You have to repaint yourself as the place for entrepreneurs, a place for technology. And the best, the suggestions I made to the president were, think in terms of attracting entrepreneurs. How do you attract entrepreneurs to your country? And that's by encouraging them to come and make their lives really interesting and exciting while they're here. If you had 5G everywhere, if you had Bitcoin as a currency, if you had specialization in AI, if the government started to say, we're going to use AI everywhere we go, and we're going to transform our country into one that is digitized, and by being digitized, it's honest, amazing things could happen. It is interesting to see that the people who are against, politicians who are against Bitcoin are the ones who don't want to have perfect records for some reason. And the ones who are for it are thinking, this could be so good for my country for the next 40 years. Why not jump ahead of it and say, we are the country for AI. We are the country that's going to make it easy for everybody.
Former Sri Lankan cricket captain Mahela Jayawardena also shared his vision for a mindset required for startup development.
The biggest thing is that identifying the talent, the resources that we have, and understanding that everyone is different. When you're looking at businesses, startups, I think the mindset is one thing, understanding, okay, what's out there and that idea, but to develop that idea to something special, you need talent, you need skills, you need different people to get together, and creating that team is very important.
At the program, startup ecosystem builder Hatch entered a strategic partnership with Draper Startup House, a global network of spaces connected to resources for entrepreneurs. The SDG 16+ Conference and Transformation Lab on Peace, Justice and Strong Institutions for a Sustainable Recovery in Sri Lanka was held in Colombo today.
The objective of the SDG 16+ conference is for capacity building, experience sharing, networking and exploring partnerships for transformative actions. The importance of the Sustainable Development Goals was outlined in the event with a special emphasis on SDG 16+.
The 2030 agenda on how to implement the SDGs very clearly talks about two pathways. One is about integration. Integration is about the three dimensions I was talking about, environmental, social and economic, into across your policy frameworks. Second one is about mainstreaming. It's not about just coming and planting anything. You create policy coherence and then you start mainstreaming the SDGs so that you have a new policy landscape emerging in the country during a period of time as a transition, and then you come to point of whether you call it prosperity, you call it well-being of all, whether you call it happiness, You need to be looking at where the convergences need to happen, and they have to be in coherence. Enormous amount of policies and institutions in the government sector, public sector. I will show you the mappings also. And if you look at, we have very good environmental policies, I must tell you. But the problem is that they, the moment that the economic policies come and supersede them, look at this whole discussion of Parivara Vanantara stuff happening, which should not be even entertained in a civilized country. That is not the way to do it. On one hand, every government from 2015 September onwards to date has pledged to the transformation, even currently. And they are doing exactly the opposite.
The event was organized by World Vision Sri Lanka, the Foundation for Innovative Social Development and KNH in partnership with Sri Lanka stakeholder SDG Platform and Centre for Environment and Development.
The Veeralog initiative hosted an exhibition to mark the 75th anniversary of Sri Lanka's independence. The exhibition was held at the University of Colombo. The exhibition was open to showcase original newspapers from the LSW Pathiratna collection. A Veeralog initiative initiator, George Cook, spoke at the event.
The exhibition came about as a result of a donation that was made, a donation of something very valuable. It wasn't a donation of money, it was a donation of artifacts which are worth much more than money. And it is these newspapers. It is titled the LSW Pathiratna collection. It has been presented by his granddaughter who is here, who I would like to acknowledge, Sajiva Ratnayaka, who presented this to me some months ago, and she wanted me to do something with it, and she said, it's yours. And we were able to curate it and put it into some form of display, and I thought, what better time than the 75th anniversary of independence. When you actually go through the papers, you will begin to understand that there is a very important narrative that runs through it. Sir Oliver, for example, talks about consecrating independence as opposed to celebrating independence. A consecration is a blessing. A celebration is a party. What did we do at independence, however? We had a party. And probably we had it every year thereafter. And this is where there is an important narrative that we can extract from original source documents.
The event was organized by the Veeralog initiative in association with the Department of International Relations of the University of Colombo. Sri Lanka will mark 75 years since independence in a few more days. In light of this, Newsfirst decided to go back in time to revisit those heroes who fought for our freedom and the places where they fought to highlight their importance to the new generation. Tonight, we salute the heroes who sacrificed their lives to the bullets of the West to bring independence to a colonized country.
"74 years ago, Sri Lanka gained independence from the British. There are a number of characters who worked tirelessly and made countless sacrifices to secure the independence of the country. Heroes whose stories deserve to be told so that we Sri Lankans can celebrate, cherish and honor their legacy. Join us as we take you through the struggle for independence of Sri Lanka.
In mid-November of 1505, a Portuguese fleet reached the shores of Colombo of Ceylon, marking the end of freedom that was enjoyed for centuries. Lorenzo de Almeida placed the emblem of his king on a post in Colombo, marking the end of Sri Lanka's sovereignty. The Portuguese fleet left but returned again in 1517, taking control of Sri Lanka's coastal belt. For over a century, the Portuguese ruled over the island, and in August 1655, the arrival of a large fleet under Dutch General Gerard Hulf posed a threat to them, and the Dutch laid siege to Colombo by sea and by land. Thereafter, the Dutch Ceylon era began, and it lasted until 1796, when the English decided to take control of the country. The defense of Dutch Ceylon was undertaken mainly by the European mercenaries, in particular the Demuron regiment. The British signed a contract with the proprietor of the regiment to transfer his regiment into British service for the sum of £5,000. However, the British were not able to gain complete control over the Pearl of the Indian Ocean just like that. The ancient chronicle reveals that in order for one to control the country, one needs to be the custodian of the sacred tooth relic, and the British were not able to control the country as a whole at the time due to the military power of the hill capital. However, the British adopted the simple strategy of divide and conquer and used a dispute among the king and his court. The British strategically obtained the support of the Ahale Polanilame and conquered the hill capital. And in 1815, they signed an agreement that would give them complete control of the country.
The human-elephant conflict in Sri Lanka is one that dates back many decades and remains unresolved even when the country is gearing up to mark 75 years of independence. Today, the people of Mahayangane carried the remains of a mother of two who fell victim to a wild elephant attack on the streets, protesting against the government's failure to solve this issue.
On the 30th of January 2023, 35-year-old D.M. Sunitha from Dehigolla in Mahayangane was killed in a wild elephant attack. She was a mother of two. Locals today carried her remains and protested by obstructing the Mahayangane Kandy Road from the Mahavali Bridge, demanding a solution for the human-elephant conflict. The group protested for almost 4 hours.
මේ ප්‍රශ්නේ මේට අවුරුදු ගානකට ඉස්සෙල්ලා කතා කරා. හැබැයි ඔය ගොළු ඇමති අපිට ඇවිල්ලා කිව්වා ඔයාලා කලබල වෙන්න එපා කතා කරන්න එපා ප්‍රශ්න දෙකක් වතුර සහ අලි ප්‍රශ්නේ කියලා. ඇයි? ඒක निराකරණය කරනවා කිව්වා. දැන් මේ වෙනකන් අපි වෙනුවෙන් මොකද්ද කළේ? තව අපේ ගම්මානවල මිනිස්සු මරණයටපත් නොවන්න අපි මැරෙන හැම එකම ගෙනල්ලා වලලාන්නේ අපේ කනත්ත තමයි එතනද. ගොළු ඇමතියාගේ මිදුල තමයි අපේ කනත්ත.
They decided to call off the protest following a written pledge from the Mahayangane ASP, who assured intervention in the issue. As per the agreement, 2 wildlife officers and 2 police officers would be deployed for security around the village.
Now in some news overseas, an Iranian couple in their 20s have been given jail sentences totaling 10 years after posting a video of themselves dancing in the streets. And that's our primetime news here on TV1. For the Newsfirst team, I'm Rara Ifwan. Good night and thank you for watching.